The letter had my name on it, my real name, not the one I'd been signing on paychecks and lease agreements for 14 years. I was 34 years old, standing at my own kitchen counter with a manila envelope from the county clerk's office, and the woman on the phone was telling me, very carefully, that the birth certificate I'd used my entire adult life didn't belong to a living person. "Ma'am," she said, "the child on this record passed away in 1991. He was 4 years old." I told her that was impossible. I was. That child. I remembered my 4th birthday. I remembered my mother's kitchen, yellow curtains, the smell of her cornbread. What I didn't know yet, standing there with my hand shaking around the phone, was that the woman who raised me, the woman I'd spent 30 years calling not really my mother, behind her back because she was only my stepmother, was about to become the one person who could tell me who I actually was. And that everything I'd believed about being unwanted, about being someone's leftover obligation, was about to be turned completely upside down. The clerk's name was Donna Whitfield, and she had the patient, over-explaining tone of someone who delivered bad news to strangers for 20 years and had never gotten used to it. "I'm going to need you to come into the office," she said. "This isn't something we can resolve over the phone." Resolve. What? My voice came out sharper than I meant it to. Behind me, my wife Sarah had stopped loading the dishwasher and was watching me with the plate still in her hand. I filled out that renewal form because my license expires next month. That's it. That's all I was trying to do. I understand, but the social security number on file was flagged in our system as belonging to a deceased minor. I'm not able to process a renewal against that number until the discrepancy is resolved. There's no discrepancy. I've had that number since I was a kid. I've used it my whole life. Jobs, taxes, my mortgage. Nobody's ever said a word. Sometimes these things sit for years before they surface, sir. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. Necessarily. But I do need you to bring in your birth certificate and any early school or medical records you have, and we'll get to the bottom of it. I hung up and stood there for a long moment, staring at the dish towel hanging from the oven handle like it might have an answer written on it. "Marcus?" Sarah set the plate down. "What was that?" "I don't know," I said, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I meant it literally. I did not know. Here is the story I had told myself, and everyone else, for 30 years. My father, Walter Hale, died when I was 3. I don't remember him, just a photograph on my mother's dresser of a man with a thick mustache and kind, tired eyes, standing in front of a car he was clearly proud of. My mother, Renata, remarried when I was 5, to a man named Curtis, and Curtis had 2 children of his own from his first marriage, my step-siblings, Beth and Danny, who were a little older than me and treated the house like it was theirs to be generous in, not mine to belong to. I don't say that to be cruel. Renata was good to me. She packed my lunches. She came to my Little League games. She sat up with me the night before my SATs, even though I was too proud to admit I was scared. But there was always a distance in her that I could never explain. A way she looked at me sometimes, not coldly, never coldly, but like she was seeing someone else standing where I stood, like grief that hadn't finished arriving. I used to think it was because I reminded her of my father, that she loved me the way you love a photograph of someone you've lost, carefully, at arm's length, because loving it too hard might mean losing it twice. When I turned 18, I left for the army, and I didn't come home much after that. Not because anyone threw me out, nothing so dramatic, but because I had built a theory of myself as a boy who was tolerated rather than wanted, a leftover from a marriage that had ended too soon, and I needed distance to become a man who didn't need anyone's tolerance. I built a life, a good one. A wife who loved me, a small contracting business I was proud of, a mortgage on a house with actual yellow curtains in the kitchen, which Sarah always said I picked because some part of me was still trying to recreate a memory I couldn't fully place. I had never once, in 30 years, questioned my own name. There's a particular kind of memory that only surfaces once you know to go looking for it, and in the days after that phone call, mine started arriving uninvited, at strange hours, while I was driving, while I was standing at a job site holding a level against a wall that didn't need checking a third time. I remembered being 9 years old and asking Renata, straight out, over breakfast, why she never talked about my father, the way other kids' mothers talked about dead fathers, with stories, with specific, funny details, the kind that make a person feel like they existed. She had gone very still over the stove that morning, spatula suspended, and said only, "Some griefs don't come with stories attached, sweetheart. Eat your eggs." I remembered a photograph that used to sit on her dresser when I was small, not the mustached man I later understood to be my father, but a different photograph, one that disappeared sometime around my 6th birthday, and that I never thought to ask about again. A young woman with dark hair, laughing at something outside the frame. I had always assumed she was some cousin, some old friend from before I was born. I remembered, too, the way Renata used to check the locks on our house at night. Not once, the way most parents do, but twice, sometimes 3 times, standing at the front door with her hand resting flat against the wood for a long moment before she'd finally go to bed. I used to think it was just a habit, a quirk, the kind of thing you stop noticing about a parent because it's simply always been true. None of it had meant anything to me at the time. All of it, I now understood, had been the visible edge of something enormous she'd spent my entire childhood keeping submerged. The county building smelled like every government building smells, burnt coffee and carpet cleaner, and Donna Whitfield had a stack of files open on her desk when I sat down across from her with my birth certificate in a folder on my knee. The waiting room had been full when I arrived, a young couple arguing quietly over a stroller, an elderly man filling out a form with painstaking slowness, a teenager staring at her phone like it was the only solid thing left in the room. I'd sat there for 40 minutes with the folder on my knee, running my thumb along the edge of it, rehearsing sentences I'd end up not using. When Donna finally called my name, I realized I'd been holding the folder so tightly the manila had gone soft and damp at the corner where my hand had been. She reviewed it for a long moment, her lips pressed thin. "Mr. Hale, I want to be honest with you, because I think you deserve that. This certificate, the seal is right. The paper stock matches records from that county in that year. But the child it was issued for is listed in a separate state database as deceased. Cause of death, structure fire. Date of death, March the 14th, 1991. The date sat in the room like a stone dropped in water. "That's not possible," I said. "I wasn't in a fire." "Do you have any memory?" she asked carefully. "Of a fire? Of a hospital stay as a small child? Anything before, say, age 5 that feels incomplete?" And here is the thing I hadn't told Sarah, hadn't told anyone, because it had never seemed important enough to be a secret. I did have one memory like that. Not a full memory. A fragment. Heat. Someone's arms around me, moving fast. A voice, not my mother's voice, saying, hold on, I've got you." Over and over like a prayer. I had always assumed it was a dream. Children have dreams that feel like memories all the time. "I need to speak to my mother," I said, and stood up so fast the chair scraped loud against the tile. Donna Whitfield didn't try to stop me. She just slid a card across the desk with a case number written on it in careful, rounded handwriting, and said, "Come back when you're ready, Mr. Hale. There's no rush on our end. Whatever this is, it's waited this long." I sat in my truck in the parking lot for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself turn the key. Sarah called twice. I didn't answer either time, not because I didn't want to hear her voice, but because I didn't trust my own yet, and some part of me needed to arrive at Renata's porch, still holding the question before anyone else's comfort had a chance to soften it. Renata Hale was 71 years old and lived alone in the same house I'd grown up leaving, ever since Curtis passed 6 years earlier. When I pulled into her driveway that evening, unannounced, she was on the porch shelling peas into a bowl in her lap, and something in my face must have told her before I said a word, because the bowl tipped and peas scattered across the wooden boards, and she didn't move to pick them up. "Marcus," she said, "just my name. Careful, the way you say a word you've been dreading having to say." "Who am I?" I asked her. She was quiet for so long I thought she might simply refuse to answer. Then she said, "Sit down, please. I've been waiting 30 years to have this conversation, and I find I still don't know how to start it." I sat. She told me. "You were 3 years old," she said, "when I met you. Not 5. 3. Your mother, your real mother, was my sister." I remember gripping the arm of the porch chair so hard the wicker bit into my palm. Her name was Colleen. She was 7 years younger than me, and she married a man named Eddie Voss when she was 22, against every warning our family gave her. He was handsome and he was charming, and underneath both of those things he was the kind of man who put his fists through drywall when he lost his temper, and eventually he stopped stopping at drywall. "Renata, let me finish, because if I stop I don't think I'll be able to start again." Her hands were folded so tight in her lap the knuckles had gone white. Colleen left him twice. Both times she went back, because he swore he'd changed, and because she was frightened of what he'd do if she didn't. The third time, she didn't go back. She took you and she came to me, and we started making a plan to disappear. New town, new names, a fresh start where he couldn't find either of you. Eddie had money. He had a lawyer. He had, God help us, some sympathetic friends on the local police force. We didn't trust the system to protect you. We were going to protect you ourselves. What happened? Her eyes filled, and for the first time in my life, I watched my mother, my aunt, cry without trying to hide it from me. There was a fire at the apartment we were staying in, the week before we were supposed to leave. Faulty wiring, the report said, though I have never in 30 years stopped wondering. Colleen didn't get out. I got you out. I ran 2 blocks with you in my arms before I could stop shaking long enough to think. The memory, heat, arms, a voice saying, "Hold on, I've got you," rearranged itself in my chest like a bone resetting. "That was you," I said. The voice. It was you. It was me. She wiped her face with the flat of her hand. An old habit, brisk and unsentimental, even in the middle of the worst thing she'd ever say to me. And in the chaos afterward, a fire, casualties, an active custody dispute with a dangerous man who I believed, I still believe, might have had something to do with that fire. I made a decision. I had a family friend who worked in records. Colleen's sister, dead in a fire alongside her nephew. That was the story that went into the system. And a little boy named Marcus Hale, son of my late husband's cousin, orphaned and taken in by family. That was the story I built for you. I moved us across 3 counties. I married your father 2 years later, a good, patient man who knew the whole truth and never once asked me to tell it to you, because he understood that the day you found out, Eddie Voss might find out too, and come looking. You said he had money, a lawyer, even friends on the police force. My hands were shaking now, and not from the cold. How do you protect a 3-year-old from someone like that? You don't. Not really. Not the way you want to. You just do the next small thing, and then the next one, and you pray the pattern holds long enough for the child to grow up. Renata reached over and took my hand in both of hers, the way she used to when I was small and couldn't sleep. I changed our last name twice in the first 2 years. I turned down a job I wanted badly because it would have put my photograph in a local paper. I told your father, your stepfather, Curtis, everything, on our second date, because I needed to know before I let myself love him whether he was the kind of man who would keep a secret that big for the rest of his life. He said yes before I'd even finished explaining why it mattered. I loved him for a great many reasons, Marcus, but that was the first one. Is he still alive, Eddie? He died 9 years ago, a heart attack, in a bar, alone. I have made absolutely certain of it, more than once over the years. She said it without a trace of remorse. I could have told you the truth the day I read it in the obituaries. I have asked myself every day since why I didn't. That look you used to give me, I said slowly, when I was a kid, like you were seeing someone else. I was seeing your mother in your face nearly every day of your life, Marcus, every single day, and I was terrified, every single day, that loving you the way I wanted to love you, out loud, without holding anything back, would somehow put a target on you that I would never forgive myself for. So I built a wall. I told myself it was for your safety. Some of it was, and some of it, if I am honest with you now, the way I owe you, was cowardice. It was easier to love you carefully than to love you the way you deserved and risk that someone would ask why. I sat with that for a long time. 30 years of believing I had been the leftover part of a family, the reminder of a man nobody wanted to talk about, the boy who was tolerated, and the truth was the opposite of everything I had built my whole identity in reaction to. I had not been unwanted. I had been protected so fiercely that the protection itself had felt, from the inside, indistinguishable from distance. Why didn't you tell me when I was older, when he died? Because by then, she said, you had built a whole self around the story I'd given you. A good self. A strong one. I told myself I didn't want to take that away from you, but that's not really honest either. I think, if I dig all the way down, I was afraid that if I told you the truth, you would ask me why I let you grow up thinking you were unloved, when the truth was that I loved you too much to explain myself. And I didn't know how to survive you asking me that question. I didn't go back to the county office for another 2 weeks. Sarah and I talked most nights on the back porch, the way we used to when we were first married and had nothing but time. She didn't tell me how to feel. She just sat with me while I worked through feeling it. One of those nights, she asked me the question I'd been avoiding asking myself. Do you feel like a different person now that you know? I thought about it longer than the question probably deserved. No, I said finally. That's what surprises me most. I still feel like Marcus. I still want the same coffee in the morning, still get the same knot in my chest before a big job walkthrough, still love you the exact same amount I loved you yesterday. What's different is everything. Behind me, it's like finding out the house you grew up in was built on a foundation nobody told you about. The house doesn't change, but you look at it differently walking in the door. And Renata, I keep waiting to be angry at her, I admitted. Really angry. 30 years is a long time to carry a silence like that, but every time I try to get angry, I just picture her running down that street with me in her arms, 26 years old and terrified, and I can't make the anger stick to her. Sarah didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, maybe it doesn't have to stick to anybody. Maybe it can just be sad and true, and over. I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count since. I called Beth, my stepsister, except she wasn't really my stepsister at all, was she? Not by any definition that mattered anymore. Just a woman who'd grown up alongside me, and loved me the way family loves each other, whether the paperwork agrees or not. She cried on the phone. She said she'd always known there was something Renata was carrying that she never let anyone touch, and that she was glad, finally, someone had been allowed to touch it. Beth drove up from 3 states away the following weekend, without waiting to be asked twice. She sat across from me at my kitchen table, the yellow-curtained one, the one Sarah always teased me about, and asked, gently, whether I wanted her to keep calling me her brother. I don't think that's a decision that changes, I told her. You didn't grow up alongside a stranger. Neither did I. She cried again, the good kind of crying, and told me a story I'd never heard, that when we were kids, she used to lie awake some nights worrying that I felt like I didn't belong in that house, and that she'd never known quite how to tell a 10-year-old boy that he did, because she hadn't had the words for it yet either. I always thought it was because of your dad dying, she said. I never once thought it might be something this big. When I finally went back to Donna Whitfield's office, I brought Renata with me, and a folder of old photographs, and a story that took the better part of an afternoon to tell an increasingly quiet room of clerks and, eventually, a state records supervisor who had clearly never had a case file quite like mine. They amended the record. It took months, paperwork, a lawyer, a DNA test that only confirmed what I already knew in my chest. My legal name in the end stayed Marcus Hale. I had lived 34 years inside it, built a marriage and a business and a whole self inside it, and Renata cried harder over that decision than almost anything else in the whole ordeal, because she said it meant some part of the gift she'd tried to give me had actually taken. But my birth certificate, now, tells the truth underneath the name. Mother, Colleen Voss. And beside her name, finally, after 30 years buried under someone else's, a line I keep a photocopy of in my wallet, folded soft at the creases, from how many times I've opened it. I've told this story out loud only a handful of times since it happened. Each time, I noticed something new about it, a detail I'd smoothed over, a feeling I'd rushed past because it was easier than sitting inside it. That's part of why I finally agreed to tell it here, in full, instead of the shorter version I've given a few close friends. Some stories need room to breathe before they can teach you anything. People ask me sometimes, when they hear the shape of this story, whether I'm angry at Renata for the 30 years of silence. I understand why they ask. I asked myself the same question, hard, more than once, on that back porch with Sarah beside me. But here is what I've come to understand, turning it over and over the way you turn a stone until it stops feeling sharp, the distance I spent 30 years interpreting as not quite loved enough was, from the very beginning, the most extreme form of love I have ever been shown. A woman ran into a burning building for a 3-year-old boy who wasn't even legally hers yet, and then spent 3 decades building and guarding a lie with her whole life so that boy could grow up safe, ordinary, unremarkable, free. I think about my mother, Colleen, sometimes, though I have almost no memories of her at all, just a warmth I can't fully locate, and a name I say out loud now, on purpose, more than I probably need to, just to make sure it keeps existing somewhere outside a filing cabinet. I've started saying it to strangers too, in small ways, mentioning her when someone asks about my family, the way you'd mention any relative. It still catches in my throat a little every time. I don't think that will ever fully go away, and I've stopped wanting it to. And I think about the version of myself that spent 30 years believing he was tolerated instead of chosen. I understand him. I was him. But I don't think I need to carry him quite the same way anymore. There was a DNA test, in the end, mostly for the state's paperwork, and partly, I think for me, some part of me needed a piece of hard science, sitting alongside all the grief and the storytelling. The results came back exactly as Renata had said they would. I remember sitting in the truck in the clinic parking lot, looking at a printout full of numbers I barely understood, and feeling, for the first time since that phone call weeks earlier, something close to peace instead of vertigo. Renata is 72 now. I call her every Sunday, and some Sundays I still just say Mom, the way I always have, and some Sundays I say Aunt Renata, half joking, and she laughs the kind of laugh that only comes from someone who thought they might never get to hear their real name spoken between us again without flinching. Last month, I asked her to tell me everything she remembered about Colleen, every small, ordinary thing, what she liked to cook, what songs she sang badly on purpose to make people laugh, whether she was messy or particular, whether she was the kind of person who finished a book in one sitting or let 5 sit half-read on a nightstand. Renata talked for 2 hours. She told me Colleen made a terrible pot roast and knew it, and made it anyway every single Sunday, out of pure stubbornness. She told me Colleen used to dance in the kitchen with the radio turned up too loud, and that I used to stand on her feet while she did it, gripping her hands, laughing the specific helpless laugh only very small children have. She told me Colleen had wanted, more than almost anything, to take me to the ocean, that she'd never seen it herself, and had promised herself she'd show it to me before I turned 5. I drove to the coast the next weekend, alone, and stood at the edge of the water for a long time, not really thinking anything in particular, just standing there, the way you stand at a grave you never got to visit. Then I called Renata from the shoreline, put her on speaker, and let her hear the waves for a while, without saying much of anything at all. She was quiet on the other end for a long time too. Then she said, very softly, she would have loved that you did that. And I understood that some debts don't get repaid so much as finally, gently, set down. I recorded the 2-hour conversation about Colleen on my phone, and I've listened to it 4 times since. I plan to play it for my own children one day, whenever Sarah and I have them, so that a woman who died before I could form a single deliberate memory of her still gets to be someone real to the family she never got the chance to watch grow. I used to think the worst thing that could happen to a person was finding out they weren't really wanted. I know better now. The worst thing is believing that for 30 years, while the truth sits one hard conversation away, waiting for someone brave enough to finally say it out loud. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. We read every single one. And if you want more true-to-life stories about the families we choose, the secrets that protect us, and the moments silence finally breaks, make sure you're subscribed, because we've got a lot more of these waiting for you.